Alright, this is Bob's Saw College on the 372 series of saws, part 2. And we're going to start this with a couple of interesting anomalies that we've seen, and I've seen as well. One is this. I don't know where you start this whole discussion, but you sort of dive right into it and we can work our way through. I've had a couple of the X-Torques come in with the plug wires actually melted up against the fins. I brought that to Bob's attention, and he made some interesting observations. I think this is a good place to start the second half of this video series.
Yeah, because I see him come into the store this way too, because guys take these things apart and don't. If you take the top cover off, you're going to notice this thing is right up against the cylinder. And the 372s have really always been like that. Even if you look real quick here, the early one. See, there's plenty of room for that plug wire to go in there. And the case, the top cover, you know, has a place for that wire to be. You don't want the wires up against the cylinder. If you do, eventually it's going to wear and it's going to start arcing through. This one, you know, this taller cylinder, there's not as much room there, and if you're putting the top cover on, you really have to remember to snap this in, just like that, and there's that little groove is cut just the right length so that it holds the wire, rather the right width so it holds the wire, and then you put the wire on after that, and you can even move it up and down a little bit. As long as it's in that groove, it's not up against the cylinder. But if you don't do that, and I've seen guys do it plenty of times, you know, it will chew its way through, and it's going to start arcing and shorting out. Now, Jonsered actually came up with we got a yellow jacket joining the party. Neither one of us are allergic to bees.
No.
Good thing Joe's not here, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, Jonsered's got a little different approach here. If you see how this is really tight here, well, Jonsered raises up the whole thing even a little bit more. And the top cover does not push the wire into the cylinder, so it's just not a problem in the Jonsered. So this is maybe a little bit better thought out. You just put the cover on. You don't have to worry about snapping that in.
Like their filtration system.
Huh?
Like their
filtration system. And their filtration, by the way, if you haven't pointed out, you want to rub it in some more. Their filter, this is the same original filter. They did not have to modify this flat top filter to clear the impulse line coming in on the top. So there was no requirement for that. So yeah, this I got to admit, Walt, this is a great system, but it's ugly. It's ugly on the orange saws. It looks good on the red saws. The orange saws, I just don't like that low top. Anyway, you know, while we got these things kind of apart, and we're talking about coils, we should talk about RPMs, tuning these things. There's a lot of different coils in these things, and many of them, for the last 10 years, probably been limited coils. Limited ignition, it's going to start breaking up. It cuts out at a certain RPMs. The original 372s went to 13,500. The new X-Torques do not and never did. They're only supposed to top out at 13,000. And a lot of people want to wind them up there, and you're just going to burn the thing up. Now, a lot of dealers don't even know that. You're only supposed to go to 13 max. The coil starts cutting out at 13.1. If you start going past that, you're up against the rev limiter. All you're doing is leaning it out. And I've seen a lot of them come in, and you can tell just by the way the plug looks that they've been running lean. And I like to put them like 12.8, 12.9. I don't even like to hit 13. And they're running a little bit fat there, and they got a lot of torque.
They seem to like fuel.
Yeah. And the other thing about these coils is because the X-Torque saws are everything's up higher, you get a longer coil wire. So if you start mixing and matching like we like to do out of the junk pile, you put the earlier coil with the shorter wire on one of these saws, even snapping in here sometimes, it's going to want to rub up against that top fin. The body of the coil will fit in there. My recommendation is if you got to buy a coil, you get I can almost remember the number. It's like the 471 coil, the last 3 digits, and you get that, and then you cut to whatever length you want. It's an unlimited coil. You go any saw that you got here to go to 346, 357, 390. You can even put in a little 338. So that's probably the best way to go if you got to buy a coil. But you can make all these work. But you just got to watch that coil, the length of the wires, because you run into the same thing you ran into with your project where you put the 272 top on the 61.
On the 61.
See here again, you got that short wire. Doesn't quite work. So, we're going to need something close up here. Since we're talking ifs and ands and things like that, when you go into some of these other shops, here again, you got to be conscious. You know, these choke levers, I said that the X-Torque's got a blue one. Jonsered, they didn't change the color, but the choke levers really don't interchange. And what you got to look for here, these are one of the original ones. No, this is the new one. And you see that choke lever's got a dog leg to it. It drops down, whereas the original choke levers are pretty much a straight run. So, again, you go in and say, I need a choke lever for a 372, you got to know which one you want. And if you're watching this and you know, and the guy doesn't ask you, you got to tell him which one you need. And hopefully you got somebody that knows a little bit what you're talking about, and not some kid that's looking at the computer screen just getting confused while you're telling him what you need. So, that kind of covers, you know, some of the things you're going to run into.
Tuning tips. You know, you got the guy who can't leave well enough alone, and
oh, you mean like increasing this stuff a little bit? Alright, let's get over here. Yeah, some of the stuff we did in the other videos, we started modifying these things, and we're generally grinding on reclaimed cylinders from saws that get run over by trucks and skidders and things like that. So
that's a very, very important point. The stuff that we work on is not anything we rely on. They are disposable saws.
Well, at least when we started, I think we got to the point now where I'm not afraid to grind on the new stuff. But while we were just kind of learning our way through this, I didn't want to be grinding on brand new $200 parts. One of the things that we've done, and we're going to need a little extra light at some point here. You can be the lighting director as well as the camera operator here. We've actually gotten a lot of power by taking out this part of the skirt. And this is the cylinder that was in the other video. Taking this thing out really lets this thing breathe a lot better. You can see it from looking at from the outside, and you can see looking from the inside. And what you want to do is you want to take this down so it's just a little bit below the cylinder base. And that will really, really open this thing up. And it's not a goofy idea, because some of the saws in this similar design, when they came out with updated models, like when the 346 went to the bigger cylinder, they did that at the factory. Jonsered did that with some of the, when they went from the 920 to 930. So this isn't an idea that's like, it's not a hokey thing. And what that'll actually allow you to do, we're using a little crankcase thing here. I'll have to throw a little bit of light in there, but these things breathe through the transfers, and you know, it's coming up through this notch, this cutout in the case. So that's kind of the stock one, and it works, obviously. You got a lot of stock saws. That's how much room you got to go in there. But watch what happens when you put one in where that's all taken away. Now that thing really jets itself in there.
Oh, they have a lot less restriction.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a much cleaner run, and that is a huge power gain. It makes a big difference. And anybody can do that with your basic little Dremel tool. So that's really kind of one of our little things that we do. The other thing, we talked about it, and I guess we could yank out one of these pistons. This is the 48 millimeter. You just take a little bit off of this piston skirt here.
Intake side. Yeah,
intake side. And what you're doing is increasing the intake duration. I take 30 to 50 thousandths, and that's it. And that does open it up quite a bit.
You can get away with 30 without checking your port timing, using a degree wheel. You get 50 or more, you probably want to check your timing first before you go that far. And that's with the base gasket out, which is the other issue.
Which is another 20 thousandths, so that's really giving you 50 thousandths increase. 30 off the piston and another 20 with the gasket being out of there. And so why don't you talk about the compression aspect of it?
Well, the base gasket is, by removing that, and we've talked about this in a bunch of the other videos, but basically by taking the base gasket out, you're dropping that whole cylinder 20 thousandths. And basically what happens is, that means the piston can go 20 thousandths closer to the top of that cylinder, to the squish band. And I guess I'm not going to go into a whole lot of discussion, but think about it this way. Typically, when I measure a stock one, you see them around 40,000 squish, 45,000 squish stock. I've seen as much as 55,000 squish stock, and that's the distance between the piston at top dead center and the squish band. Take that base gasket out and you reduce that squish by 20 thousandths, and you get a couple of things. One, obviously you get an increase in compression because the overall volume of the combustion chamber has now been reduced a little bit. But more importantly, when you reduce the distance between the squish band and the piston, you're squeezing out gas air mix in that area into the combustion chamber to be burned, where it probably would not have ignited if it was still underneath the squish band and piston. So what you're trying to do when you reduce the squish band is to squeeze more of the useful mixture into the combustion chamber for an actual burn. And that's actually as important as the actual compression hit. I don't know if that makes sense. Did I make it? Does that make sense?
Oh, it's far too technical for me.
Because you're getting no, you're going to get a percentage.
I know. I'm kidding you.
Yeah. Moving on.
Okay, I got to add something in here. This may require editing. This goes back to our earlier discussion here. A little bit of wrapping up here on this cutting and these little mods that we're doing, this basic recipe, which we call the Farmer Jones mod, the Spike Special mod. What we've discovered is, as far as how effective it is if you do this recipe on a, like say the 48 millimeter, the 365, it will easily run with or better than the stock 50 millimeter top end. I know that the conventional wisdom, like, oh, you got to get the big bore, get the biggest one. Yeah, that works. A lot of that is promoted, I think, by guys that are looking to sell cylinders. Now, I sell cylinders too, but I don't like throwing away cylinders that are in good shape, that have nothing wrong with them. So if I had the 48 millimeter top end, which is what I did on this, I used on this ugly old 371, to me it's better to do the modifications and go at, or in this case, this is beyond the stock 372 as far as performance goes. It's better to use what you got, make a few simple changes to it, than to throw the thing out and then buy a big bore kit. I mean, you're much better off to stick with this and do something with it as opposed to just tossing it in the garbage. There's so many of these really good cylinders, sitting on shelves, like the Chinese big bore kits running into saws. I just don't understand that at all. But you can make this thing run really good. That's a simple recipe.
A little terminology, because there is a slight difference between Farmer Jones and Spike Special. All right. Farmer Jones was our first iteration. It was a relatively unsophisticated mod, and the Farmer Jones consisted of building it without a base gasket with 1194 and punching a hole in the muffler. You got that XP somewhere.
There's a couple of crude ones here.
I think this one here, people can relate to that. So, no base gasket and less restriction in that pressure can, or that one, along with a very slight increase in duration, like Bob had mentioned, either trimming the bottom of the intake port or the skirt of the piston. Now, the Spike Special is Farmer Jones with some engineering, and that's what Bob was talking about here, where he was removing some of the material here around the transfer area. So the Farmer Jones is a really basic way to increase your saw's performance. It's not a whole lot of risk, and the Spike Special requires a little bit of skill. How's that?
That's acceptable. That's good. That's good.
Of course, I'm going to edit the heck out of it.
Oh yeah, well, we have to.
So where are we? We've talked about the critical things. Actually, there's another thing I'd like you to discuss a little bit, and that is I've seen a couple of saws come in where guys have really cranked on those those intake boots, then wonder why it's leaking behind the carb.
What can happen if you really crank the heck out of this thing, you can start to bend it and distort it, and your attempt to eliminate a leak, you're going to create one.
You're flexing that bracket.
So,
yeah.
You can kind of overdo it, but they've built, this is a sturdier bracket than the original one. And one thing you can look for, if you got an air leak, sometimes it's hard to find. This thing's old, one of the original ones, but you know, this piece of plastic has nuts that are molded into it, and the other thing that can happen from cranking them down too tight is you'll actually crack this, sometimes on the outside, often on the inside. And when you tighten it up, you're actually opening it up, and you will have a leak that way. So sometimes you got an air leak around here, and you think it's the boot. Sometimes it's not the boot. This thing is actually cracked, and it's got to be replaced. It's a cheap part.
Yeah.
It's a cheap part. It's not a big deal. But if you hammer on that, that can crack.
And what Bob was saying is that the new version has a more sophisticated bracket design, which is quite a bit more rugged than the older one. So that's an improvement on the X-Torx, on that boot to carburetor junction right there. What else? Tuning. We've got 9 minutes left. So that means we've got 20 minutes of video up.
Well, I don't know. Can you hit a stop? We'll figure it out.
You know, I think a person with a discerning eye is going to notice that when we first started this video, all these saws were all lined up nice, parallel, and in an orderly fashion. And as the video went on, things went to sort of a state of disarray, entropy in its purest form. Is it entropy or enthalpy? It's one of those two damn things. But it's amazing what happens with a couple of beers introduce themselves into the mix. So anyway, we're going to close off the tuning tips section of this video, and we're going to close it out with just a simple discussion of the differences between the 372 series of saws and the prior generation 272 series of saws. Bob's off and getting one of the 272s right now.
Oh, it's the wrong one. I'm sorry.
You see what I was saying? Now, we pointed out the difference between the Farmer Jones and the Spike Special, and what Bob was pointing out, and it's something we've proven several times now, is a 365 48 millimeter cylinder modified the way Bob does will easily have more power than a standard 372. And the point is, why spend the extra money if you can just take what you have with some very simple tools and technique and get the performance increase without any real loss in reliability? You're not going to lose much. I mean, you can theoretically say you might because of the higher compression, because of the no base gasket, but you know something? I would argue that 20,000 squish, say 180,000 pounds per square inch of pressure on the top end is within the design limits of that saw. I don't think you're going to see any reduction in performance. Unlike some of the builders who really go crazy with compression, over 200 pounds per square inch, that is beginning to push the design limits of the cases. And I don't know if they would hold up as well in the field, in the environment that I've been exposed to this last year. Some of the customer saws that come in, Bob's been telling me this for years and years, and I've picked up a couple of guys who have a logging operation. I've been servicing and maintaining their saws, and let me tell you what, the life of a saw in that logging operations rotation is a whole lot different than the life of a saw of an Enthusiast. And some of those builds that have these really high compression ratios, I don't think they would survive. I honestly don't. I don't think they would. But anyway, so on to the next wrinkle of this particular video, and that is, what do you get from one generation to the next? From the 272s, like these, to the 372s, like those, other than more money, better fuel usage, and I don't know, more bling.
This is the age-old debate. The 272 chassis versus the 372 chassis. And this could have the potential for a real good argument, but unfortunately we pretty much agree on everything. So it won't be quite as entertaining. So did they make a better saw or not? Now I know that some people are going to have strong feelings either way, but my opinion is that it improved in almost every conceivable way. It's smoother. It's got more power, and it's a little bit lighter. Although it feels a little different sometimes. I'm not saying that they're all big margins of improvement, but I think in each category or aspect that you would look at, you would say that they improved them a little bit.
And that's the 372 versus the 272.
Yeah.
The 372 being a rather significant improvement. Starting out with the quad port design versus the 2-port design that the 272 had.
Yeah, and here again, it's like, one of the things that guys really love to argue about is inboard clutch versus outboard clutch. And we'll just go into this. There's probably people watching this like, you better say the right thing, because I'm a strong advocate of this way or that way.
What was that, rotational force or
well,
whatever it is?
you know what? Some ways, the center line on the outboard clutch ones, they do seem to almost feel like they handle just a wee bit better. I mean, we're really, first of all, we are splitting hairs right now, because most people wouldn't be sitting around with all these saws on the deck talking about them. They just be out either cutting with them, and they wouldn't be wiping them off like we do when we're done with them. So yeah, we're splitting hairs, but that's what this is all about. So for anybody that's not sure, inboard clutch means that the case comes out and surrounds the clutch, as you see here. This is on Walt's 2172. The earlier series had the outboard style clutch, as you see on this. Obviously there's some other things that are a little bit different here. Your whole chain brake mechanism's in the side cover here, because the clutch and the drum are outside. This is all internal. Two things that people say about these that are important. If you get the saw pinched in a tree, it's far easier to get your power head out of the bar than this. Although I've done it with this. Buddy of mine, Mike, he got his 257 stuck, and it was just, saw was cherry. We did everything we could. It took a while, but we got it off. The big advantage here is if your rim sprocket is worn and you want to change the rim sprocket, I mean, all you got to do is that. You take the washer out, the spacer out, you change the rim sprocket. If you want to do that over here, you got to take the top cover off. You got to take the clutch off, which means you got to take the plug out, put a piston stop in it. So just this alone, and a lot of times you see something, that rim sprocket in the shop, it looks like, well, you know what, you ought to get that changed. It's a real quick thing to do. And then, putting it back in, you put the new one on, you put that on, and then all you need is just a pair of pliers, and boom. I mean, you could do, a dozen of these in a time it would take you to do just one of those. So from a shop standpoint, that's something.
Well, from a user standpoint, when you clean your saw, it's easier just to, like you were saying, when you're talking about taking the power head off a stuck saw, just changing your bar and chain is radically easier, especially out in the field with the inboard clutch versus the outboard.
I think on most of the saws, since we got the side cover off, and you can see the side adjust chain tensioner. I mean, that's nice to have. Now, what we just covered was strictly from our practical minds, but we probably have a slightly different opinion as far as which ones are the most fun.
I don't know.
Okay. These saws are a little bit simpler. I think to a certain extent, the other chassis, you have a little more fun with them, because when you're building all these dead saws, and here again, this is from the hobbyist perspective, you do have to kind of mix and match things a little bit different in order to make things work. like we mentioned earlier, you got all these different intakes and stuff like that. But overall, you know, if you really had to go into the woods for a day, as opposed to just cutting a load of firewood, you know, you're probably going to want the newer one.
Well, add to it just a little bit. There's a weight difference between them, and the anti-vibe on the new version is a lot better than the anti-vibe on these older ones.
It's way better.
But you know, I'm going to throw in a little bit of a devil's advocate here. When you even though the inboard clutch is a whole lot easier to use and live with, there is one advantage of having an outboard clutch like that, and that is where the heat ends up when that thing is doing its job. And on the inboard clutch, it stays in the case and on the bearing. On the outboard clutch, it's easier for it to dissipate the heat. Does that matter in most applications? No, probably not. But I'm going to point out that on the Husqvarna Big Saw, the 395, the one that a person might be using for milling and things like that, guess what? They have a clutch like that.
Yeah, but I think that's more due to when it was designed.
No, I think it might be both.
Because, you know, this is where everything went. You know, the 390 came out. They have it. You know, most of your big stills have the inboard clutch. And I guess the bottom line is, if the saw is built well enough, it's going to handle the heat.
Well, that's one of the arguments. So we do have a minor, ever so slight, different interpretation on the build.
The day would be exceedingly boring if we didn't disagree on something.
Yeah. All right. Carburation and the way the carburetor is mounted to the cylinder. The newer saws have got these rubber boots which do two things. One, isolates the carburetor from vibration, but also at some level can isolate the carburetor from heat. Now, what's he say to that one?
Well, the heat is the more significant of the two. They discovered early on that in a really hot environment, all-day use, what you would see is you start seeing, you know, the saws would just get hot and they start leaning out and they'd just be blowing up. And that would happen on some of the 266's. And one of the first things they did to try to alleviate that was they went with a sleeved carburetor bolt with a plastic sleeve on it that would you know,
insulate.
It would insulate and dissipate some of the heat a little bit differently. But obviously, and I tell you, I think Steel came out with this a little bit first. Maybe on the 38.
Well, they got to be first at something.
They got to be first at something. They got some smart guys over there too. So then it was like, that's the way to go. Now this is the way everything comes out now, really, on both companies. Intake blocks are really a thing of the past. But it wasn't really that bad by the time they got, you know. Actually, they did that sleeve, the plastic sleeve on the carburetor bolt did make a big difference. But without that, you know, here again, from a hobbyist perspective, you know, there's things that you just will not run into that the pro guys will. I mean, you could take a saw with a moderate air leak and go out and cut a load of firewood and fill a pickup truck and never notice anything wrong. If you spent 2 or 3 days all day in the woods, that saw is toast.
So what else do we have to talk about on these?
Boy, on these, I don't know. I mean, think of it before I put everything away, but I'm like, just got that thing on.
Is it a wrap?
I'd like to go to Act 2 here.
Okay.
We'll change the set.
Well, that's it. We'll take one flyby here with the camera. And I think this video's a wrap. So, if you guys have more things you want us to discuss, throw them in the comment line.